try not to touch things.
Is there a reason for that other than it just is distracting for potential listeners?
Yeah, it's just noise. Like, I mean, I imagine, and also as a listener, I don't really want to hear these noises when somebody's trying to talk.
I mean, if they're obnoxious enough, no. But I was just curious. I guess depending on the format of the podcast, if the setting is supposed to be that it's quiet and you're just hearing people speak, then yeah. But I mean, are there any podcasts that perform or whatever you'd call it, record in like an ambient setting, like where there's just background noise that again wouldn't be distracting or abrasive, but just that,
There are podcasts that have that, but I always wonder if it's added in. Like
that would be kind of
they add in like a mumbled, like just people talking to make it sound like this is an interview happening in a cafe or something like that.
Yeah.
Or if it really is happening in a cafe. I don't know. I think they probably record it in a studio and then add it in
later. See that? Oh, that's almost worse. I mean, whatever. If you're creating your own show, I guess do what you want to, but
because if you actually record in a cafe, then it's not going to be a consistent like background noise. It's going to be quiet at moments, loud at moments. There's going to be somebody yelling like, "Did you make that espresso for Linda?" Like it's going to be really like,
That's what I would like about that though.
Yeah.
I guess it would take away from the conversation maybe. Which is better though? Like to have a more free-flowing conversation that's open to just the different, I don't know, whims of whatever the universe is bringing? Or is it just better to have it quiet and focused so that way the conversation is being led by the two people that are there?
I don't know. I mean, the way I've been doing it is I want to have it so that there's no noise except for the voices talking into the microphones. And there's been many episodes where I've failed at that. Not really my fault, but just the environment. Like, this is an apartment where there's not really a lot of noise externally, but some places I've recorded, and even at my own apartment, it's been like a siren goes by, or there's like birds chirping, which can be a nice thing. But like,
did I ever tell you about the time here where I don't, not that maybe many people do, but I haven't like called the cops much in my life, but there was one time where I was this close to calling 911 because all of a sudden, seemingly out of nowhere, upstairs, all of a sudden I just heard this really loud banging noise, like, and consistent and steady, and it was just really, really loud.
And it wasn't somebody fucking?
I don't think so. I mean, I didn't hear any accompanying like moans of pleasure or
fucking a corpse.
Well, maybe. What it sounded like in my head, like what I was visualizing, was that somebody was taking like a big sack of sand or that salt, like water softener salt, and just throwing it on the ground and picking it up and throwing it. Like that was the only thing in my head at the moment that I was like, that's what that sounds like. Or a dead body maybe. And just I have it on my phone. I can show you later. I recorded it just in case. Because I was kind of keeping my eyes peeled out the window in case I were to see like some guy go out with a trash can, like a bag that looks suspicious.
Human shaped.
Yeah. But anyway, like right as I was thinking about calling somebody, it stopped. So
maybe that was his workout routine of just throwing a bag on the ground, and then he stopped because he realized it was too loud.
Maybe. So that was why it only happened once. Because I was like, well,
darn it, can't throw just a big sack of salt on the floor 10 times.
Maybe he got just really mad about something, and that was the way he took it out. Which, to be fair, other than the couple of minutes of confusion and worry it caused me, it wasn't hurting anyone.
Yeah.
So,
well, it might have been hurting.
As far as I know. Yeah.
It might have literally been hurting someone.
Hurting and, killing someone. But it makes me think, I mean, well, we've talked about that before. I don't know, are we starting yet? Or are we just still like testing noises?
No, I guess I'll maybe include some of that.
Okay.
Sure, we're starting.
Okay. Hold on. Let me quick turn off that light though.
Well, welcome to the Regular People Podcast. I am Wade Allen, as ever, and I'm joined today by Brian. I don't remember, do you like Brian or do you like just Brian?
Either one's fine.
In
both are my name.
Right. You're fine with your last name being publicized?
Sure.
I think that's what I did
Brian
last
or Brian John or...
Yes.
What's your middle name? I know it, but I don't know it right now.
Cameron.
I knew it started with the C. Cameron.
Yeah.
Okay. Keep going. Sorry.
So, yes, today I'm joined by Brian Orr. Cameron is my mom's maiden name,
Mm.
and now it is her last name again. So it's like I have, my mom's last name and my dad's last name in my name, which I guess is progressive. It's not just patrilineal, it's matrilineal as well.
Do you know what your names mean?
Nope.
I thought Wade meant to go. Otherwise, it might have meant like Ford, which I guess would make sense.
Well, yeah, it literally means, at least in modern usage, to
we can
walk
look
through
up
water.
what your name means. I've been doing that with people lately, just curious on if they know what their names mean, and if that at all influences their character at all, whether they know it or not know it. I suppose if you didn't know it, it would be more mysterious about how it might influence you, but that's why I've been curious. Anyway.
Yeah, I would imagine it wouldn't influence you if you didn't know it. And I still don't know why it would influence you that much if you did know it. Like you're trying to live up to your name, the meaning of your name. I don't know. Do most names have meanings?
I think so. Don't most words? Are there any words that just don't mean anything?
I guess how many names are just made up words,
Yeah.
Or how many names have a past history of actually being words and then they became names after they were already words?
That's a good question that I'm surprised I don't think I've ever asked myself. Like, are there words that exist that just don't have a meaning to anything?
Well, I mean, I assume, like, especially nowadays, maybe the past 100 years where, like, names have become less traditional.
Yeah.
I imagine most of the new names don't have any meaning because somebody just thought this sound is cool, so I'm going to say it.
But doesn't that still mean something? And this is maybe, it's semantics at that point, but like, if someone's using a word, even if it's just because it sounds cool or it sounds funny or it sounds whatever, it's still producing that.
So then the meaning of your name is, my mom thought this sounds cool.
Yeah. You know what I mean? Like,
I guess.
Otherwise, why would
that's not really like a specific meaning. That's like because that would be, then it would be like the name Elrond and the name Jarnuvius both have the same meaning because they both sound cool. Or like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
if they both were for the same purpose in the mother or father's mind of, I like this name and that's as far as it goes, then they both have the same meaning, even though they're different words. So I guess there'd be lots of synonym names.
Or it just starts off with because it sounds cool or because it produces a certain emotion, and then over enough time, that's how people or enough people decide that it specifically means maybe something else.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what I'm wondering too about like older fashioned names that are in heavy usage that do have meanings. Is that how it happened? Like it was a name that was so commonly used that people decided to ascribe a specific meaning to it. Like this word means loyal.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is a name that means that. Or was it that was actually a word in some language that meant that thing, and somebody decided, I'm going to name my child the word for hungry and use that. And the word for hungry was Jacob or whatever. Like, which way does it go? Or does it go both ways and it just depends entirely on the name?
It's one of the almost maybe everything that confuses me and mystifies me about life and how we find ourselves here. It's like how the words that we're using with each other in the order and the grammar and just the sounds that we use, like how did that happen? But it happened, and here we are talking about it.
They managed to register a meaning in our minds, even though they're just a bunch of sounds.
Yeah. And at any point, they must have started out with not meaning anything, but somebody once said somewhere, this means that thing. Like I use the example with like elephant. Like I can say that sound with my face, and then it produces, I'm assuming, an image that I would also use for elephant. But at one point, before people decided that it was that animal, somebody they could have been using elephant for stove. You know, I mean, probably weren't, but anyway, point is, this is weird.
Yeah, that is interesting to think about. And like how, somebody can be speaking in a whole vocabulary of different sounds that means nothing at all to you because it's in a different language. But it could mean something to you in just a couple of years if you decide to dedicate your time to understanding those sounds and what they mean. But also with the point about somebody using the word elephant to mean stove, and then a group of people come along and say, no, elephant is referring to this weird animal over here. I imagine like what happens then. There must be some sort of clash if the person like still wants to use the word elephant to mean stove, so they resist this newfangled this newfangled way of using the word until one group outlasts the other, and now nobody's around that uses elephant to mean stove. That was
the first war ever. It was elephant versus stove.
But you can see that kind of thing happening in like I guess a little bit in like culture wars. And I remember specifically this guy in France that I talked to. He was like an older guy, and he was telling me about this. Maybe it's like entirely an old person thing or an old man thing even, but he was like trying to be anyway, a word conservationist, where there was like the French language was evolving, and I mean, like any language, it always is really. And he was telling me about how like it needs to, like these words should maintain their original meanings. I don't remember exactly his reasoning, but it was interesting to see that, like, people do actually try to resist the morphing of words into new meanings.
I can see it both ways, perhaps unsurprisingly, but it's that thing of if words didn't have some sort of staying power, then they would stop meaning what they meant, because if the definition was always changing, then what's the point of having the word meaning something at the same point or at the same time? I forget if we've talked about this just together or even if it was brought up in another conversation, but I think it's useful of like the purpose that slang is always changing is because words lose their emotional power with new generations of people. So they have to change the words that they use to match the emotions they're feeling, because when they hear their parents use certain words that are trying to mean the same thing as the kids are feeling, there's a disconnect. So like when their parents are doing what the parents think is cool and they're like, this is so cool, the kid's like, that is not cool, so I have to use a different word to describe what I think is cool. You know what I mean? So again, I get why words should stay, or why an argument could be made for like don't change the definitions of words, but I get why they do.
Yeah. It strikes me now that I think we did talk about words and the meaning of words the last time.
Oh yeah, well, it's been a while.
and I wasn't even thinking of that, and I'm sure neither were you. So what's interesting to me is that with a certain person, you can come back to the same topics, and it's like, what is it about the relationship with that person that would make these topics like perennial topics?
Yeah.
Like, if you go see your brother, like maybe you don't talk about it every time, but like over the years, you notice there's like themes that come up with that between you and that person. And I see that in my own relationships, and I see that with you, of like there are themes that we discuss that, there's always some amount of overlap with any two conversations with like different people, of like we might talk about something and I might talk about that with someone else, but like if you bundled all of the concepts and ideas that like you talk about with any one person, you would start to form a kind of like a map of stronger connections, like thicker lines being formed about this concept between that person or that person. And you would see like, oh, I have these different relationships that correspond to different concepts.
Would you say that ours cluster around anything in particular?
I don't know about any one thing. Like, we definitely talked about like meanings of things several times, and like, generalizations and change. And also one thing that definitely comes up a lot is contradiction and like middle ground.
Yeah, I mean, that's a recurring theme now in my life and probably will be forever, since discovering in my way of thinking just like the wisdom of the Tao, the Tao.
Yeah.
And just that the extremes exist, and that in some sense the universe can be thought of like a constant interplay of all these opposites, and that maybe the best or the most, I don't know if useful is the right word, but like the best way of being is just to figure out like in any of the situations where all of these things are interplaying, like what's the most, I don't know, it's just like what's the best way of being, like what's the best way to balance them all. But anyway, yeah.
I do have one more thought on the meaning of words and the culture clash of resisting the change of word meanings or embracing the change. And it's one thing that I feel like I've been thinking about over the past several years, but I don't know if I've said to you, and I don't think I've said on a podcast anyway, is one case where I do see this kind of crystallized of people fighting over new meaning or old meaning, is when it comes to words that are words that are around sex and gender, like male, female, or man, woman, or boy, girl. Because then for me, I'm thinking, are these words, are they sex-based words or are they gender-based words? And for the longest time, it seems like maybe probably also because like sex and gender were considered essentially the same thing for a long time. Not quite, but they were very interlinked. With that, all these words, man, female, or male, female, man, woman, were sex based. And now there's a strong push towards making them be gender based. And not in all cases, but in a lot of ways of people disagreeing about gender identities or trans or any sort of changes in how we talk about these things. I feel like some of it is a resistance to, at least on my part anyway, a resistance to these words being gender-based in favor of them being sex-based words. Or at the very least, the confusion of a trade-off or a seeming non-stable or non-concrete decision between, is this word sex-based or gender-based? Because I hear personally a lot of people all over the political spectrum use the words man, woman, female, male to be sex-based in one time they say it and gender-based another time they say it. So then it just makes everything confused of like what it actually is standing for here, which I think only feeds into the conflict of like gender identities in the first place.
So when you use the terms sex and gender separately, do you have separate meanings to them in your vocabulary?
Well, I think like the term sex and gender, I do. Like, sex would be biological in nature, and gender, I guess I'm fine with adopting, or the idea of, how you present yourself in terms of cultural norms. Masculine gender is the one that fits under the box of stereotypical masculine behavior, and then vice versa. So then the thing that I'm specifically talking about is when you use a word like boy, are you referring to biology there, or are you referring to cultural norms? And then it's not, people don't use these words like boy or man or female or male. They don't use those words to always refer to either sex or always refer to gender. It switches around. So it makes it hard to basically know what people are saying unless you ask them every single time.
Mm-hmm. So then if someone were to ask you, like, what is your sex? What is your gender? Would you have different answers for those?
Me, no.
Okay.
But like, I'm sure other people would.
Oh, nowadays I'm sure they would.
Because I would be cisgendered, so my gender matches my sex. Obviously, it's, I think, silly to say that you like fit completely into the whatever the cultural norm is of masculinity.
Yeah.
Because I don't, and I don't know how many people do.
Well, and this might be another area of many where my personal feeling is that a lot of folks are just talking past each other.
Yeah, that's basically what I'm
right.
like saying. People are using these words in different ways. So in their argument, they're not even actually achieving anything because they're not getting to the bottom of basically the semantics is in the way, or like the meaning that they're trying to get across.
And I guess I'm trying to think how to present this idea. I, on one hand, try to be empathetic to a person's striving to discover what their identity is. On the other hand, I also wonder if the culture that we're in is doing a great job of like navigating that, only because, and this might be where people are talking past at each other, contributing to the problem, but I can appreciate that certain people or a certain group of people are upset or sort of look at the current state of the culture when it comes to gender and sex identity and sort of, and I maybe would fall more in this camp, but not entirely, of looking at it and just being like very overwhelmed with the idea that there are now 7,000 different gender identities or different pronouns that people can use. And I guess maybe what it comes down to for me is that the way that maybe I'm trying to conceptualize this is that when it comes to sex, like there being male and female, and to be fair, there are also, I mean, it's a pretty low percentage as far as I understand, but there
intersex.
are people that are born with sort of a mix or a, it's not as clearly defined,
or they have like 3 like XY.
Yeah. That being said, I am completely on board with the idea that just because you're born either male or female does not in any way indicate what your personality will become.
Yeah, or like how you have to portray yourself.
Right. Yeah. And I think that maybe to me is like what is at the core of this is that like in my opinion, every individual person has the potential to present differently than any other individual person. And to try to come up with like 10,000 different ways of classifying that, to me, is in some sense sort of missing the point, or it's like a fruitless endeavor, because at the end of the day, you're just going to end up with at the individual level anyway.
Yeah.
So it's like, to me, I don't know if I'm right, but it's just like maybe it's useful to have, well, we don't maybe have to keep it binary, but like a more simple system. And then in the system, you can recognize that there's a tremendous amount of variability, and that, I don't know, like where it kind of gets weird to me. And again, maybe this is just because I don't find myself in the shoes of someone that's going through it, is if I didn't feel like my sex matched my gender, like what role do other people have in participating in that with me, or to the extent that I even know like what's going on with me, which I, again, appreciate that that's maybe someone in that position is trying to figure out. But I don't know, there's a lot to this thing. But what I do value in it, I really, at the end of the day, is that I appreciate that it's something like humans trying to figure out themselves. The way that we're doing it, I don't know if it's like all going great, but we're trying, I think.
It prompts two things, and hopefully I'll remember both of them as I speak.
Pen and paper.
Yeah. The first one is, I think that because of, well, maybe not entirely, but partially because of what I was saying about, is a pronoun referring to sex or gender? If you ask, a person that's politically left, they'll say gender. If you ask a person that's politically right, they might say sex. So you're approaching a word from two different angles. So I feel like because of these misunderstandings or non-agreement about the usage of words, it can become very easy to misunderstand or straw man the opposite side, no matter what side you're on. Because from my perspective, for people that have talked to me, it kind of seems like both sides think the other side is misunderstanding, or both sides thinks the other side is in disagreement with science. Because it's like the stereotypical conservative perspective would be, these people think that they can literally change their biology. That's crazy, because they're using a sex-based pronoun situation. At least I think so a lot of the time. And the other people are like thinking like, oh, the conservatives want to put me in a box and don't want anybody to express their individuality, and like they hate me for it. And I don't know if either side of that is really true. I think I feel like I've been seeing more messaging along the lines of, no, like nobody thinks, like from the left anyway, like no, nobody thinks that you can change your biology, to like clear that up. But I feel like especially in like 2015 or 16, it wasn't clear like what people were actually saying about their identity, like if they were really saying they can change their literal biology or not, or if it's just about expression as the societal norms, whether you fit into them or not. So maybe it's clearing up, but
people are trying to change their biology though, aren't they? I mean, isn't that what they're doing when they get sex change operations or take hormone therapy?
Yeah, that is actually one thing that I find interesting and wonder why it's done, because that is another case where it seems the ideas seem to conflict of like, if it's a change of gender in how you present yourself in terms of, are you going to be more stereotypically feminine or masculine? How does your biology, or like your body and like your organs, how does that come into play with presenting as more feminine? Like if you are a male, as in, chromosomes, you have XY, but you want to present, because, you feel it as your identity, want to present feminine. I don't really see the connection there between needing, like why there's the need to get a boob job.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it doesn't make sense to me, but I try to be as open as I can to learning. I mean, there's still a lot that I disagree with in the conversation that I hear, but as long as I still go back to that idea, at least for me, to try to make sense of it, of we're trying to figure out our identity. And part of me wonders too, this might not be true, but have we solved so many of life's really hard problems, at least as far as surviving, that like these are the issues that we've sort of been coming up for ourselves to sort of keep us busy? And I know that it's not just that, of course, but maybe
there's all sorts of layers of problems like in society that can happen at once.
And it might be a part of our evolution. It's like, now that we have sort of it's interesting. Maybe I've thought about this, but it's like clicking in my head of like, maybe it was the case that as we were hunters and gatherers and evolving through time, that it was extremely useful for the survival of our species to sort of designate itself like in a binary, that
Yeah.
having a man with male traits and woman with female traits was really useful to survive. And then now that we've gotten to this point where surviving is more or less much easier than it used to be, like the human psyche is starting to explore that, oh, like we can, it doesn't have to be those two things, and it can start evolving or changing. um, I know for me, at least, just with where I'm at in my life, and I could change my thinking here too, is just, to me, it seems clear that there is a biological component, certainly to sex. Like there are males and females,
Right.
and that tends to come with certain traits. But where I maybe part then with certain people that would agree with that first part is that I by no means think that has to translate into behaving a certain way
Right. Yeah.
necessarily. Is, because we've used the example before where I certainly can acknowledge that there are more masculine females or more feminine males, but that
Right.
doesn't take away the fact that their biological sex is what it is
Yeah.
to me.
And I guess like with what I was saying about a biological male getting a boob job, like I think you're free to do that and do whatever you want, but it does muddle the idea of whatever culture is deciding upon, or like the conflict of, are you trying to change your sex or your gender? Like it just makes it more confusing of
Yeah.
what is the claim here, what is being changed,
Yeah.
and what is not.
Well, and something that I, at least on a personal level, find very disturbing, and I don't have a solution for it necessarily, is just the messaging that a lot of children are getting, and that if certain children express their identity as being anything other than in line with what has been commonly agreed upon as the sex that they are, there's at least in my view or the way I see things, like there's a push to at least not discourage them from like changing their actual sex identity. Then like it's almost both. Like there are kids that are like pretty young kids that then are pressured into, or are, again, at least not discouraged from like changing into the opposite
Yeah, I don't know
sex.
how much they're pressured into it. I mean, maybe as like an ambient societal thing, but I don't know if there's individuals in their life that are pressuring them into it. But yeah, you're probably right that there's not people that are discouraging it because you want to be accepting of whatever your child does.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I do think that it's probably the case that the claims of, sexuality and gender being taught to kindergartners or whatever is inflated. Like I don't know how many kindergarten classrooms have that in their curriculum whatsoever.
Right. And I wonder too, because you obviously hear stories of it, but you hear stories of a lot of times the things that are the outliers or the ones that
Yeah.
stand out. I mean, just because they are outliers or things that stand out doesn't mean they're not important. But yeah, I wonder the same thing. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, what I always come back to is just, if I was in that situation, what would I do? And if I knew that if I had a kid and they were in a classroom that was being taught, I guess it would always depend on how it was being taught. But yeah, I don't know that kindergartners need to be involving themselves with all of that yet.
Yeah, I don't think they are. And I also wonder about how it's being taught, because I can't imagine. I mean, I guess teachers can, well, a lot of cases, do what they want. You've got the biology teacher who is teaching you because they're a Christian that this isn't actually literally true, but I have to teach this because, or else so they kind of heavily signal the idea that, evolution isn't real while teaching you evolution. It could be that kind of thing going on with sexuality or whatever, but I still do find it a little bit hard to believe that any teachers would be teaching about sex and gender in any way that's not just informative. Like, I imagine you would inform kids of, I don't know, whenever you start sex ed, that there are such things as, multiple, or like not different gender identities. But I think it would be strange, and I would want to see like actual proof of this, that any teacher is like trying to influence the children to adopt those different gender identities, or like trying to actually change the kids rather than just informing of them of the state of society and how people are living their lives. But
I'd have to go find it. I mean, my feeling is that I've seen it, that it is out there, but again, to what prevalence and to what extent is it true? There was something I was going to say on that point, but it's slipping from me.
That's okay.
Anyway, was there anything else we had to talk about?
Yeah, I had one other thing that I wanted to say, and this kind of leads up to it, because I wonder, because it's definitely true that changes in society on like a macro scale influence individuals of like how they see themselves and what the decisions they make and like how they want to live their lives. I'm sure that when the Indiana Jones movie, the first one, came out, there was probably a noticeable increase in the amount of kids who said they wanted to be archaeologists.
Mm-hmm.
Or whatever it is. Like, when we land on the moon, there's probably an increase in interest in being an astronaut and things like that. So when you see more, just more prevalence through movies or TV shows or whatever of people having, a non-cisgender, that like that would increase the amount of people that then go and feel that way themselves. So then I wonder to what extent, and that not just about gender identity, but really about life choices and just identity in general of like who you think you are, how much of it is attributed to society at large influencing you, and how much of it, if any at all, is entirely like from within, or like who you really are, if that even means anything.
I think it does, but yeah, I don't know like to what level either one.
Yeah, like if you, with the same biology, same body, same brain, were just put or raised in a different context, a different society, or a different time, like how different would you end up being just because of the ideas of the culture that you live in? I don't know how much of the people who are getting sex change surgeries, how much of that is coming from within or how much of that is coming from without.
Yeah, that's a good question.
So then the thing that I wanted to say that was my second idea that I mentioned earlier was that I've been thinking lately about just like the concept of identity and who you mentioned this a little bit, but like who is in charge of what you would identify as, like, because on some level it would make sense to say I'm in charge of how I identify myself, like how I identify, but also on a different level that doesn't make any sense. Like there needs to be some sort of maybe mixture of who's in charge, because
where the Tao comes in again.
Right.
It's not just you, it's not just us.
It doesn't make sense for me to identify as whatever I feel like, because if I want to identify as a doctor and, I'm literally not qualified to be a doctor, I would get sued for that. And that's like what happens. People pass themselves off as doctors, and unsuspecting people come in to get like chakra treatments under the impression that this person has like an actual medical certificate when they don't. So it's like that is something that like is against the law for you to misidentify yourself. And then like not even just with like a profession, but like if I want to identify as all sorts of things, a lot of them are crazy, or a lot of them literally aren't true. But then there's other things where it's like that's completely accepted. Like if I want to identify myself as an introvert, nobody's gonna like say, no, you're not an introvert, you're not allowed to identify yourself as that. So there's like a range of all sorts of identification labels that you could put on things, that some are entirely up to the individual and some are agreed upon by society. So I wonder where like gender identity fits into that. Like, does it make sense entirely for every individual to completely decide on their own what gender they are? Or does a lot of it come down to how everybody else sees them?
What would you say, like, so say for instance, you identify presumably as Wade, right?
Right. Yeah, changing names, that's another.
Names too, yeah, we mentioned that earlier. So here's one line of thinking. It's where I can understand why people that are heavily critical of a lot of this stuff are coming from when they say, it's kind of like what we talked about at the beginning. If words don't mean anything, then what's the point of using them? Or if they're so frivolous, then like what's the point of trying to identify as that if it's just going to change? Where, you pointed out that, well, there are certain things that are obviously literally true that you wouldn't be able to just identify without people seeing as ridiculous. But I think that is what people that are critical of
right. That's the attitude that someone further right than me would take on if I were to call myself she or a female. Like they would think of that the same way as me calling myself a doctor,
like a tea kettle or something.
Like
if you're extreme, just if you can identify as anything and it's just based on how you're feeling in the moment, then, and again, like what role do they have in participating in that with you? Yeah. And that's where I really don't have the answer. I don't know. And what was the answer for a long time was the system that we had where there were males and females and he's and she's. And like, I think the way that I think is trying to boil things down into like practical real life examples.
Yeah.
So like, say for instance, we lived in a world where we started adopting, however, like 70 whatever pronouns it is it my responsibility then, like every time I meet someone, like is that how you'd always have to like bring that up right away, and then you'd have to memorize that for everyone? Or would we all wear like certain name tags, or you know what I mean? Because like, how else would you know? And then if it's as offensive as it can sometimes be portrayed if you get it wrong, you know what I mean? Like it just, it's, any system is going to have its flaws or its potential for like faux pas or something, but like there's like a practical utility in me in keeping it simpler. That being said, I also can see the point that depending on how, like what you were saying earlier, how you define those things, or if you conflate gender and sex, that people would walk around with that label and feel that they're being misrepresented or something. So yeah, I mean, I guess I still don't know what the answer would be on how to like remedy that, other than maybe what we were kind of doing, at least to me, of recognizing that maybe we can keep sex simple, but keep identity very complex, even so complex that don't even try to maybe label it a certain way, because it's just going to come down to you.
Yeah.
So maybe, I don't know, that would just be a way. I don't know if it's the way.
Yeah. This makes me think of two things. One of them I think we've talked about a little bit before, so I'll mention it briefly, is like when it comes to art or like a story, a movie, let's say, like who decides the meaning of it? There's the person who created it, who probably had a vision for, and to them, like a meaning of like what they were portraying with this story. But then the viewer comes along and they might get a different message from it. And like, are they both right? Is it that the viewer who, thinks that the frequency of the color blue was actually signaling that the main character is depressed, and that is not the intention of the director at all? Like, is the viewer just wrong there? So really the meaning comes down to the owner of the work, or like, does the populace contribute to what the thing means? And I'm sure it's some amount of both. Yeah.
Both.
So then maybe that leads me to thinking that like with like individual identity, maybe it's too much for it to come down to the individual. And it's also maybe too much like how it was 200 years ago for the individual to not have a say at all in what their identity is. So there's probably some amount of balance to be had there. Mm-hmm. And the other thing that makes me think of is religion as an example of this. Because I could, truthfully, at least I could feel it in my mind that I'm a Catholic, let's say. But you could be a Catholic, and you could see how I don't like go to church, or maybe I don't even follow some of the, like I don't really care about a lot of the like orthopraxy of being a Catholic. But I use the label Catholic. So you might think that I'm not really a Catholic because I don't, donate any, I don't like do the good works, and I don't exhibit as a Catholic typically does. So does that make me not a Catholic? Or am I a Catholic and you just are an asshole for thinking I'm not?
It's a good way of actually just like transitioning the thinking about it, at least to me, because, and maybe this speaks to what I think you said at the very beginning, or we both said, just that it is almost a boiling down of just a difference in semantics, like the way that we're speaking. But that's where I think maybe the big problem is with where we're at, is we're just trying to figure out what to do about that. Because what if it is the case that it's not just this, but what if there were two different groups of people that literally just don't agree on what the definition of something is? Yeah. Well, we said at the beginning too, with the other example, what's the answer? Is it war? And then people just fighting it out until there's no more people that don't think that you do? I mean, I really deep down in my idealistic heart hope that there's a different outcome than that. But then what is it? Is that we can agree to have different interpretations and live together, as long as what? I mean, certain fundamental values aren't infringed upon, but for I think that's why maybe it's coming to a head the way that it is now, is because those values are so fundamental to people.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be literally war. Like, it could be, the war of ideas, or what I think is interesting, it could be something that has nothing to do with the ideas or the concepts themselves. Like, for instance, the person who uses the word elephant to mean stove, and the person who uses the word elephant to mean the animal. It could be that the stove person, the stove group, the idea died out because of completely unrelated factors of this, the animal elephant people were just more successful, in the gene pool. Like they had more children and they, spread their genes more so that, and the other people didn't as successfully. So over the course of 2,000 years, the stove people dwindled and dwindled, and it wasn't through any violence, and it wasn't even through any spreading of ideas. It wasn't through convincing anyone to use the alternate word of meaning of elephant. It's just, so that makes me wonder, like, how many ideas and concepts and how much of culture that we have is actually decided not even by the ideas themselves, but just the success of the people who hold those ideas.
Well, but what if the success of the people that hold those ideas are here because something in the ideas caused them to be successful? You know what I mean? And that's where I don't know. And I the phrase that comes to mind that I know modern people are largely critical of is like might is right. Like, just because something is strong doesn't necessarily mean it's maybe the best. But it is interesting, at least for me, to think about just as an idea that, like, what if it is the case that the things that survive, at least to some extent, are surviving because they're providing some truth, and it might not be the whole truth. It might not be nothing but the truth. So, oh my God. But you know what I mean? Because it's like, so in a weird way, that almost gives me not comfort, maybe comfort, that like nature, whatever nature is, or the course of nature will figure it out on its own, because it won't persist if it's truly wrong. That actually just gave me kind of things, because like goosebumps, just because maybe there's something to that. And maybe it's like playing the long game, because certainly you can look at a graph and see where that is not always the case, that there are certain things that, well, at least maybe to us seem objectively wrong, assuming there is even such a thing, but like where it kind of goes up and down, but like largely is going up. Yeah. So like maybe nature in all of its wisdom or beauty or something is like pushing us towards the ultimate fruition of the good or the best. And it's just because we're imperfect and because there's a lot of mistakes along the way, it's going to be messy.
Yeah. But this is memetics, basically, just the competition of memes of ideas, like how genes compete. And it is interesting to think about, but I think there's like so many confounding variables that it's hard to even know. It's maybe impossible to know, but it's also like hard for the memes themselves, if they were thinking creatures or even creatures at all, to know that they are the ones who are causing the success. Because if you have an idea, the problem is it's not just the one idea that the organism has. They have like thousands of ideas. So they could be more successful because of a handful of those ideas, but which ones? Mm-hmm. And then it could be that a ton of their ideas are actually detrimental, but that those detriments are outweighed by a few of the ideas' pros, basically. So it could be that the elephant animal group was better because of their ideas than the elephant stove group, but it wasn't because of the elephant idea. It could be because of a different idea that they had.
Yeah. But it came along, and maybe it's coming, like, is it coming along for a reason or not? Or, and another way of thinking about it is just, is the universe some grand experiment, and this is just playing out how it is? But that's still like, maybe this is just because we're humans and we're trying to put meaning on things. And I personally think that there maybe is ultimate meaning deep down. I have no idea. Maybe there's not. But the fact that what's persisting is still here might mean something. But I'm fully aware that it might also not. But it's, I don't know, it's just interesting to think about. Because, like, what would it mean if it wasn't? Like,
well, won't it be?
I may be losing the thread of where we're at.
Won't it be non-existent eventually, though?
Well,
so if it means something for it to exist now, but it won't exist at a future point, then where's the ultimacy of this meaning?
I don't know. And just living it in the now. That's maybe where it gets more Eastern philosophical.
But yeah, wouldn't whatever meaning this has, wouldn't it be transient?
Yeah.
If it's attached to the fact that
and maybe that's
exists.
the point. Yeah, is that it's all just like the point of it is just to experience it, whatever it is, and just see what happens. Then maybe, like, I don't know. Oh God, I don't know. I have a list of like 40 things, and we haven't gotten to any of them yet, which is great. But
what go down your list? Well, you don't have to go down the list.
Well, I was just going to ask, was there anything else with what we've been talking about so far that you had to say? Let me allow you to answer that first.
I feel like there's always things that I could say, but nothing that's like pressing that I feel like I need to get out. So we can move on to.
Well, one of the things that is in my head now, since you mentioned it earlier, of like being with certain people, and that maybe making sense that it would like light up certain areas or certain clusters of things.
Right.
Like I'm just curious about like what clusters do I have with you versus other people. So then one of the questions that came to my mind, if we would even know how to answer it, like is there anything that you and I haven't ever discussed? Like is
Oh,
there
there must be.
like is there any cluster of ideas that we just have never touched? And of course there must be, but like I guess maybe another way of asking is, are there any that we would both find interesting that we just like the other person's point of view? Because like certainly we've never talked about, I don't know, like kitchen knives or something, like, oh, like do you ever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like dish towels, but maybe we wouldn't have anything interesting to say about them unless you do. But I'm thinking like, oh man, is there any territory of ideas or life or existence that I haven't asked Wade about that I would want to?
I imagine there is, and it'd be more like a blind spot thing.
Yeah,
Where you can't think of
you
the
don't
thing.
know what you don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
But it is interesting to me, like, I guess because I was imagining it's like a map of like nodes that are connected by lines, and these lines get more intense with the frequency that they come up. And then that's an indication of like who this person is, the things that they think about the most, which then they would naturally bring up with other people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think those things would be different for other people. So like, I don't know, you don't bring up current politics. So it's like that is something that you don't really care about. You care about more like ideas or like everlasting concepts.
The themes.
Or like the human condition or, you know, the psyche, things like that. Where somebody else that I might talk to maybe always brings up current politics. So like that is a much more stronger concept that I relate to that person and not to you. So it's basically this like imaginary map that I'm thinking of is a way to conceptualize people or like, I guess the memes they carry. I don't know. So that's interesting. But then like things that we've never talked about that would be interesting if we did talk about them. I feel like surely they must exist, but just because of the nature of like the things you care about most or the things that you're going to be talking about most, it's probably like these things are overlooked, even if they would be interesting, because there's so much to say. Even if it's repetitive, there's so much to say about the things that you're most invested in.
It has been to some extent. But yet I enjoy it every time. See, that's the interesting thing to me.
Well, I think I'm just going to stop saying this at this point, like we've talked about before. I feel like it's the comfort of rereading a book or watching a movie you've already seen. It's like it's good to have repetitiveness in your relationships or in the ideas that come up within those relationships every once in a while. I don't know why. Maybe it's like nostalgia, or maybe it's like a reification of the relationship itself.
Like an anchor point or something.
Yeah. If in this map of people that I talk to, Brian stands for something, then I kind of want these ideas that are common to come up with Brian, because that'll make me feel like this is Brian. You know, like it'll give me more, I don't know, feeling that is you that I'm talking to, and like a re-meeting.
Yeah, it makes me think of a few things. The first one is a quote I brought up with another friend of mine the other day, where I agree with everything that you just said. And at the same time, one of the reasons why I enjoy rereading books is because of that quote that's something like, a man never steps into the same river twice, because it's never the same water and he's never the same man. Yeah. So it's...
Was that the full quote?
I think something like that.
Okay. In my book of quotes, I just have a man never steps into the same river twice. And that's
okay.
But okay. That's good to know.
Well, anyway, but it's that idea that like we're always seeing things. It's like, I always go back to that, that scene from the movie Bridesmaids where the main character Annie has a best friend that's getting married, and then the best friend that's getting married has like a new best friend, Helen, and I forget the best friend's name. I guess it doesn't really
I don't remember. I've only seen the movie once.
Anyway, but like they're like meeting for tennis, and they're navigating that dynamic of like the one friend that's known her for a really long time, but like the new best friend, and they're talking about like, isn't it great how like you just get to know someone, and it's like, yeah, you know, getting to know them when like they're a new person, and like, well, I think you're always kind of the same. I think we're always growing and changing.
Yeah, they're just
like, but we're always growing, but into the person that we always were. And like, they're like trying to justify why. Anyway.
Yeah, they're like trying to not argue, but then they're arguing at the same time.
Yeah. Go watch the scene. It's funny.
It's pretty funny.
Anyway, so I feel like that's kind of like what we're talking about. Because like on the one hand, the reason why I know you to the extent that I do, or still invite you over and to talk, and that is because I have this idea of you in my head that is more or less, at least in theory, the same, like that you're going to be sort of the same person that's coming through my door, because this is the extreme, but if you were someone that walked through my door and just started beating the shit out of me, like that would be so counter to what I would,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? What you are or who you are to me. So yeah, like there is some level of like meeting with people again for that. Comfort again isn't necessarily the right word, but familiarity maybe. But at the same time, what's exciting about a relationship is that it almost is that conversation between Annie and Helen that like we're the same people, but like we are still growing, like we
Yeah.
are still changing, we're evolving, and hopefully maybe becoming better. And to get to like share in that with someone is really exciting, while still recognizing that like, oh, but like Wade is still Wade though.
Yeah.
He's just like a better, more advanced Wade.
I agree. It's definitely both things. There's that comfort or nostalgia or like reification of the person, of coming across the same ideas. Oh, these are the concepts Brian likes to talk about. But then also, yeah, I agree, because like you read a book, you find new things in the book. So it's like you're finding newness, you're finding intricacies and nuances in the things that you already, for the most part, know about the person. So by bringing it up again naturally, you're not forcing, you're not like, tell me more about the thing that you told me last time. It's just, it always happens. It's like, even though it's in some ways can be repetitive, it's also, there is a difference. It's like the Thai people have a saying, same but different. And I guess it's kind of like that. One thing though, I had one of those moments where like the lights go on, that you said about me just coming and beating the shit out of you.
Oh, great. I'm glad that lit something up.
Is that what trauma is? And I'm not saying beating the shit out of you. I'm saying
encountering someone so different than
like, yeah, drastic change that you were unequipped to
Yeah.
prepare for. Like you weren't prepared for. Like, yeah, if you've known me for 20 years and all of a sudden I do something so drastically different, like, is that trauma? Is that what scars you?
It's certainly a big part of it.
So it's like, your mother figure or whatever, you for a little while have been getting comfort from her, and that's all you expect from her, and then all of a sudden she locks you in a room for a day, and then that traumatizes you because it's such a departure from your previous relationship that you had.
Yeah, I would agree. I would consider that traumatic.
Well, yeah, but I'm wondering, like, not like, is that a trauma, but is that like fundamentally trauma?
Yeah, that idea, I think so. That if you, so then I'm trying to think though, because that assumes that the thing that hurt you wasn't necessarily the thing itself, but how you thought about it, or like how you conceptualized it. But certainly the thing can still hurt you. But I think you're right. Like maybe the more harmful thing, or the thing that sticks with you that like changes you, is just the fact that like it's your paradigm changing. Like you
like the sudden intense change. Because a lot of like trauma is obviously like horrible, like beatings and rape and like neglect and whatnot. But there's also a lot of like trauma or like persistent changes that happen within you and that make you feel uncomfortable and bad, that aren't like obviously bad, like culture shock. Like you're raised in an environment that's homogenous for 20 years, and then you travel somewhere else and it's completely different, and you feel like homesick and like lost, and like I feel like that perhaps in this thinking of the word trauma could be described as a trauma, especially how like it does have a lasting impact on you, and like this complete divergence from the culture you've ever known, like suddenly jumping headfirst into a new one, is going to have probably a lifelong effect.
What's interesting to me then is how much your attitude plays into it, and maybe that's like where therapy comes in and trying to help or heal after the fact, is like changing the story about it. So it's almost like if you can change your story, you can almost change what happened, because if somebody comes in and beats the crap out of you and breaks your arm, your arm might heal and it might still have scars, which I guess is another proof that it happened. But your arm heals maybe however long it takes for arms to heal, but the trauma, the thing that can hurt more, is just the broken trust, or the realization that, wow, I did not see that coming, or that just it broke something that was more like almost fundamental to you than like the bone that was broken. And then in trying to heal that or fix that, it's more psychological. So again, to me, that just goes back to like the importance of the stories that we tell ourselves. But there's something really encouraging about that to me, in that like maybe the sooner, or the more like viscerally you realize that, oh my God, like I have a say in the experience of my life, the more you can use it And that maybe leads into something we've definitely talked about before with like being the dreamer and all of this, like realizing that, oh my God, like I have power here. And that's something I've changed my mind about more in recent years, definitely, is like just the power of the mind and the power of the individual. And like, don't get me wrong, there might be many things that are outside of our control, but I think Viktor Frankl has a quote that says something like, everything can be taken from a man except the last of human freedoms, like the ability to choose one's own way in any given set of circumstances. That's not the exact quote, but it's something like that. And I don't know, I just, if nothing else, it seems to be a useful way of looking at the world rather than maybe gnashing your teeth and succumbing to like despair. But, but maybe there's a time and place for that. I don't know.
It's interesting to me too, because beliefs and your outlook on things definitely changes your story, changes how you feel about it and the life you live. And that can like go both ways. It can be good and bad. You can use that to overcome trauma, and then you can also use that to invent trauma. Like, I feel like maybe if you asked me 2 years ago, I would have been pretty much all for therapy, just like people in general going to a therapist. Now I feel like I'm much more reluctant to say that. Like, I feel like I'm not so sure therapy is a good thing, or at least always a good thing. Or I feel like it's a drastic mix, maybe even 50-50, good or bad. Because not just for this reason, but this is an example, I suppose, and it goes along with the story altering your perception. Is like, there's cases, plenty of them, where you can induce, especially through like hypnotism, you can induce a person believing a story, a thing that happened to them that didn't really happen to them. You can fabricate memories and ideas, and then this will actually get the person to like change, like emotionally, and like you can get them to feel like they were traumatized when really they never were, and now it's essentially they might as well have been traumatized because they think they were so strongly that they've traumatized themselves through belief.
To me, that's, how would I put this? It reinforces to me that something about it is quote unquote true, though. And what I mean is that I sort of see all of life, or a lot of life, just as utilization of tools. And like any tool, it can be used for good or for bad, or however you want to categorize it. But the fact that you can use it either way shows that there's something to it. So then the morality, or the thing that we have to try to hold ourselves accountable to is how it's not, you know what I mean? So like, for an example, when you were talking about therapy, it made me think of like massage therapy, which technically I'm trained in. And I feel exactly the same way, that the thing that can make or break the experience is the therapist itself, and certainly the client themselves too. But like, you can have a really great therapist, or one that really does not know what they're doing, and that can actually hurt you.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that massage therapy is not something to be done. It just means that you have to have someone that really knows what they're doing, and that, again, you have that trust with, for whatever any of that's worth.
Yeah.
It's not what it is, it's how we use it.
Yeah. My views on therapy have gone more from good to more from, it depends.
Yeah. Find a good therapist, or find someone that you can talk to.
So what did you have on your list of 40 ideas?
Well, before we even get to that, there's one other thing, and maybe we've touched on this a little bit before, but I'm fascinated with Eureka moments.
Yeah.
Like things like those times when it clicks.
Yeah. That's what you live for, I feel like. For
me,
anyway.
Yeah, well, it's certainly one of them. So for you, who's someone else other than me, as far as I know, like, do you feel it in a particular place, like in your body, or like how does it manifest for you?
That's a good question. I feel like sometimes you get like the body shivers.
Yeah.
Which is cool. But I don't think there's like a specific section of the body that I feel anything in.
Like not a raging erection or anything.
Yeah, or like a part of my brain, like the right side of my brain, like lights up. It's like I don't know, it's just a moment of clarity. I feel like energized, like a shot of like adrenaline in that moment. Or like dopamine too. Because it's like it feels good. but it's like a whole body thing, I guess,
Hmm.
rather than any specific part.
And what do we suppose, if anything, triggers it? Like, what is the thing that causes it?
I would imagine, like, physiologically, like physically speaking, it's probably a lot of neurons going off at the same time more than usual.
Okay.
Maybe like across the whole brain, or like a wide swath of the brain, like just neuron firings, where normally they're more eclectic and not happening all the time. It's just like one, like, of like
Yeah.
all these neurons at once. That's, I don't know what I would guess is happening.
Okay.
So it's just like it's almost like a miniature brain reset of just like all of your neurons were, not all of them literally, but like, a larger amount of them than normal are working towards one idea, rather
Yeah.
than like, I feel like normally you're kind of thinking of all sorts of things, like you're perceiving your surroundings and you've got multiple ideas going on at the same time. It's just everything is focused.
So that's interesting because it could maybe be both of these things or separate. Maybe they're, well, I'll speak them out loud and then we can see. But on the one hand, it can be like a more intense focusing, like a more intense concentration on something. The other way that I've often thought about it is that it's something like all of these disparate parts all of a sudden find a way to connect together. Like maybe
I
there's
would
like
think of those as the same.
yeah, so right. So maybe they are the same. So that would be interesting that there's like 20 different things that maybe through the course of your life you might on some level or another be thinking about. And then there's like something, whatever it is, it's a conversation, it's like seeing something in nature that all of a sudden like unites them all. And then like it is that eureka, like just things come together. But what's interesting to me, especially if we use the example of a conversation, bringing it on, going back to how we started the conversation, that we just used a sound. Like we just used a combination of sounds that for in some way, this is why I think life is magic, that induced that. And how weird, like
Yeah.
how weird is that? Because how many times throughout the day are we just blah, 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 and that's not happening. But like in certain circumstances, in the right place at the right time in the right way, something is said and all of a sudden it's just like whoa.
I mean, that makes me, it's also with sounds, but that makes me think of music. Like,
Yeah. Oh,
you can
God.
hear
Thank God
all
for
sorts
music.
of different tones and melodies and chords, and a lot of them they're just there. But then sometimes they make you feel like that certain way, or
Like that song I
many
was playing
certain
for
ways.
you at the beginning.
Yeah, like you can get a certain song, and you'll just feel like intense body shivers, like memories flash back, or like it'll transport you mentally to a different place.
And what the hell is that about? Like I love that it happens, but
Yeah.
it's so weird. I mean, this is why this is all just it's all a dream, but
Yeah, it is weird how certain things just click for you. And I think a different plausible physical description of what's happening in those eureka moments, inspired from what you just said about different things coming together finally, is perhaps instead of all of your neurons firing with a, similar thought, or working on the same project together, it could be the feeling of like a new neuron connection, like new synapses like have touched, or like, it's like literally a new connection in your brain that, like, yeah, you're working on these different ideas, and then maybe even for like a year or more, and then they finally touch and you realize they're like connected in some way. And yeah, that's like that eureka moment. And that moment is actually facilitated, obviously not only because I felt it tons throughout my life, but that moment is definitely facilitated by drugs. If you take like LSD or like a high dose of like cannabis, you can have that sensation of disparate thoughts and ideas and observations that form to connect into something cohesive and focused, like a new revelation about the universe. Except the interesting thing there is it feels like a eureka moment when you're under the influence of, say, LSD, but then, and it might actually be a eureka moment a lot of the time. Like sometimes it might actually be a realization that sticks with you. But then also a lot of the time is you can't really describe it, what these ideas were and what this focal point was and what this revelation that you had actually was. And then when you're no longer under the influence of LSD, you can't, it doesn't make any sense to you anymore. So it's like an illusory one, like a false one. Like you had this connection and it seemed like the world was coming together and making sense, but really it was just like the drugs. Like really it's nothing that was actually a permanent revelation. It was just like, if you were tried to explain it in the moment to somebody, they'd probably like think it's great that you're enthusiastic about this thing, and they might even feel like try to get what you're saying too because you're so into it, but they probably wouldn't actually know what the fuck you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, and I can't explain your experience or someone else's experience for you or for them, but the way that I would try to paint that in a more like optimistic light would be that maybe, well, but maybe the point of that is that it's more about the state of being rather than it is any single
Like actual idea.
realization.
Yeah.
It's almost just like, it's not that you realize something about something, it's just that you are being in a way that's more
Right.
authentic to like
Yeah.
how we're supposed to be. Or it reminds me, I just want to look it up on my phone quick because my one of the characters that I resonate the most with in anything I've experienced, like in, well, in this case fiction, but just in art, is Guru Patik from
Avatar, the Last
Avatar.
Airbender. Yeah.
And one of the quotes that I love from him is, "The greatest illusion of this world is the illusion of separation.
Oh yeah.
Things you think are separate and different are actually one and the same." And he goes on, we are all one people, but we live as if divided. So that just makes me think of that, where like maybe when you're under the influence, or maybe when there's these eureka moments of things connecting, we're getting to that like next level plane where we realize that as useful as putting things in boxes and categorizing things so we can study them and blah blah blah, as useful as that can be, like the greater truth to all that is that it is all part of the same thing. It's just like different versions of it or different manifestations of it. So when we have those moments where like stepping outside of it for a moment and like going, oh yeah, like here it is, here we all are.
Yeah. I guess yeah, the experience is wonder. Like that's what,
yeah,
that's what
one
you're
of my
feeling.
favorite words.
And I guess in it maybe also a more optimistic way of thinking about these drug-induced wonder moments is it makes you feel wonder about ordinary things. Like things that when you're not under the influence, you don't feel wonder about.
Yeah.
So when you're back to that normal state, it's like, it's just a chair. And you were enthralled by that chair 3 hours ago because like
it's a chair.
Yeah, like how crazy is that thing right there? Like, wow. And so I guess maybe is actually like a good thing. It's good to have. It gives you that like, I guess like childlike sense, and I mean that in a good way.
Yeah.
Of wonder that you're missing out so frequently in life.
I remember, I don't remember when I came across it, but I appreciated this distinction once of it's good to be childlike but not childish.
Yeah.
And I just like that distinction of like the childlike is something to maybe strive for, but not to be childish.
That might be a C.S. Lewis thing, if I remember right. He wrote an essay that was pretty good once, just about writing.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about like something about children's books and how like contemporaries of his or whatever were making fun of him for reading children's books as an adult and for writing children's books. And he was basically making that point of like being like having that childlike joy for things and that wonder, like that's only a good thing. It's the being childish or being there's a distinction there that people are trying to, like, at least in his essay, we're lumping together of like adult is the only way, don't be.
Yeah, it's funny, I was with my mom back in October. I go up to see where she lives in Michigan just to go visit her, and I love the landscape where she is in the time of year. It's just pretty anyway. And we were talking about this a little bit because on her bookshelf she'll have either novels or just books that are thousands of pages long, and I've read them too, that certainly contain value and contain interesting ideas and that are probably worthwhile reading and worthwhile for the writers to write. At the same time, my mom has a collection of children's books. Some of them in particular are just really beautifully done, like not only well written, but the illustrations are gorgeous. And I swear if I had to choose between the two, I would pick the children's books every time, because there's something more like distilled and more like accessible about it than sitting through a 1,000-page tome and reading through it. And again, they probably both have their uses, but there must just be something, at least for me, that is more instinctually just drawn to that, like that simplicity, that distillation of ideas and beauty and wisdom.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to say too, with the recognizing the mundane as sacred too, I notice that it's something in my life that keeps happening more frequently, which is probably one of the many reasons that those that interact with me every day probably think I'm crazy is that I'll just spontaneously be like laughing or be like smiling at things. And in a way, it's kind of sad to realize how much that doesn't maybe happen. But I mean, a lot of examples come to mind. But there was another time, like in the fall, where I felt like such an idiot, kind of, but not really, where I was just like driving home one autumn morning from like grocery shopping, something you do every day, right? And there was this road I was driving down, and the sun was shining in such a way and the leaves were falling in such a way on this road that like it all just overcame me and I started crying, like not like bawling, but like
Yeah.
it was just like overwhelming of like, holy shit, like look at the beauty and the joy of and the just unlikelihood of all this happening, and that it was everyday stuff, but it was like, oh, and I was so happy that that happened, because it's like, wow. I try to take that with me of what you had said too, just like, look at a chair and realize what it is. I don't know. It's like it on the one hand, one might use it as an excuse not to go search for great things, but at the same time, if you can recognize the greatness in the things that you already have, I think both are important personality traits or something.
Yeah.
Like, by all means, go see the seven wonders of the world and appreciate them for the majesty that they have, but like also just go and like look at your table.
Yeah.
Look in someone's eyes. That should be something we do sometime, because I don't think we ever have, is to just like prolonged eye contact. Prolonged eye contact. No. But
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
And that's true though, and it also speaks to the power of thought, and how everything is modulated by your thought anyway. So like, if you can manage to have a wondrous, or you could call it noetic experience when you go to see one of the seven wonders of the world, you can have that anywhere, because it's still just being manufactured by your brain. Like, you can manage to come up with that same wonder and joy and like awe at anything.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I think so. Especially people. I mean, animals too. I mean, again, this applies literally, I think, to anything. But what's cool to me about like just people watching, besides just the interesting behavior in that, but it is like that recognition that each of us is the culmination of billions of years of like stars exploding and matter changing, and you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's just, it blows my mind when I think about all of the things that had to happen that just lead to us talking right now. I mean, I look at my hands and it's just weird that, like, I make my friend Tara at work laugh all the time, because, like, sometimes I'll just be sitting there going, like, just moving my hand or, like, standing up and standing down. Like, how weird is that I can just do that? And, like, I mean, oh, yeah.
And that's the thing that people, including myself, take for granted on more than one level, because you take it for granted just in that cosmic sense of like, wow, it took so long and so many chance processes for this to happen. But at the same time, it's like, or the other way you take it for granted is, when you're 65, sitting up and sitting down again, that's gonna be a difficult endeavor.
I'm already enjoying it now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
most people probably will at that moment be like, oh, why didn't I like find enjoyment in just being able to walk when I was 20?
Yeah.
So if you can, and if you do that, then that's great. You won't have that regret when you're 65 and you can't walk in as well.
I don't remember if I brought this up anytime we've talked or in a previous podcast, but I remember reading a book, and I'm going to forget the name of it now, but I'll find it and send it to you if you're interested. But there was the guy that wrote the book talking about the two different forces that are at work in the universe, at least two, that seem opposing but that sort of feed each other. And on the one hand, one is entropy, that everything is decaying, everything is kind of dissolving or destroying and falling apart. On the other hand, there's evolution, which is growing and changing and becoming more sophisticated. And so on the two E's, on the one hand entropy, and the one hand evolution, and that like they're creating a friction against each other that's producing something. But I forget if he mentioned that there was a specific force behind entropy, but what I liked in a romantic sort of way that he said was the force behind evolution was like love at the end of the day. Like, it was one way of looking at it, that the thing that's driving life and things changing is like, it's something like this ultimate love that's, I don't know, causing things to continue. And again, admittedly, it resonated with me because that's just the way I look at the world. But at the same time, it felt like there was something to it because, like, what is behind it, if anything? I mean, I guess it could just be particles and atoms like smashing together in certain combinations, but I don't know.
I mean, even that's attraction.
Right. So it just depends what you mean.
I guess that brought me too close to like the law of attraction, which is not something I abide by. But
I think it depends how you mean it,
right?
Because that's the thing. I mean, honestly, I've heard people talk about what they think it means, and I mean, well, I might disagree, but there are other ways that I've heard it described or that I will think about, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that. Like, why not? So again, it's almost like it's a choice. But anyway.
Yeah, but what you're saying about love, that is something that I've heard people who are more philosophical theologians say, like they would define as like, you know, the power behind the universe, or like God or whatever. They're just like, God is love.
Mm-hmm.
Or like that the power, or like the underlying unity or creator force of the universe is love, as like a concept rather than as a personified thing.
So that finally leads to one of the things I have on my list.
Sure, let's start with this list.
Well, this was like, what is your definition of love, or like, what does that look like to you? I have a few lists. There's the one I made for today, and then there was the one I had last time. So yeah, like what is it? And I know there's that song, "What is love?" But like, how do you define it, or what does it like mean to you?
I guess one way of thinking about love would be like wanting goodness, wanting like, if you love someone or love like an animal, like you want good things to happen to them, you want them to be happy. But then another way that I normally feel love more is like adoration, or like I guess attraction, like wanting to be around the person or thing or idea. Like if I love music, I want to have that music by me. If I love a book, I want to be engaged. Like, so bringing things closer, I guess, would be the vague concept. Things that you bring towards you rather than push away. Yeah.
Do you think it's something that it's something that just is there, or do you think it's something you can cultivate? Like, do you think it's something you can make or build?
I guess it would depend on how it's framed, because I don't think it's something that you can like control, like specifically, like, you know, Jamie Lannister's line of, you know, we don't choose whom we love. I think that's definitely true. You don't like make a decision to love someone, but also at the same time, I do think you can cultivate love. You can choose, in a sense, to like broaden your mind, or like try something new, or like have a positive attitude to something that's incoming, which will make you a lot more likely to embrace it rather than reject it. Like you can try to flip that switch in your brain. So I guess it'd be more like adopting a loving attitude, where then you would be more likely to love just the things around you, rather than like a spotlight of love, of like, I'm going to love that thing. That's what I would think. What about you?
Like many or most, it's some combination of both, right? Because there are certain things that over the course of life just will attract you or will stand out to you.
Yeah.
And the reasons for that are mysterious to me too. And at the same time, there's something that I think as I've gotten older, I almost respect more about the choosing it too. Like, again, I think it's both. And man, is there something powerful to be said for just being enthralled by something that's sort of outside of your control. But at the same time, I think whether it's a person, whether it's a goal, whether it's like a craft or whatever, like there's almost maybe something that means more to me about the love that you choose, like that you make like a decision that I will continue with this, even if it gets hard, even if it's difficult, that I won't drop just at the first sign of trouble or difficulty. It's like, even when that comes along, like I will choose this.
But don't you think that in making that choice, you're already in love with that thing?
Probably. But
Like, you only make that choice if you love it.
but how many times do people face difficulty and then give up? And is that an indication that they didn't really love the thing, or was it? I mean, I don't know. Because I mean,
I guess love then wouldn't be binary. Like, there's a strength
yeah.
of love. Like, yeah, if things get hard and you drop it, then
Did you really not love it enough, or love it?
I feel like you probably still loved it, but like you love other things more, I suppose. Because I don't think it's just a yes, no, love, not love. It's probably like a how much love.
Yeah.
And like it's like competing interests, like do you love convenience more than you love something else? And if something gets in the way of your convenience, then it's like, well, you might have loved the thing, but you love convenience more. So it's like, it's not, I feel like, I guess when talking about specific loves, it's not like it's all working in harmony. You have to choose like which one to love more, or which one to spend more time on. Just like with relationships, like you can't spend time equally on all of them, or as much as you want on all of them. You have to sacrifice some. And it doesn't mean you don't love them at all,
That concept came up in a book that I just finished reading with a friend, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. Have you ever read that book?
I haven't read it, but yeah,
I'd recommend it. I enjoyed it. But anyway, that came up, just that rejection actually can be a positive thing in that sense, and it isn't something that should necessarily be avoided, because sometimes I think modern people maybe have this idea that if you're acting from a place of love, that right, you're giving like equal time and equal attention to all things, and it's like, that's one, it's probably not realistic, but that it's okay to prioritize things, but then the important thing is just to figure out what your priorities are, and then I suppose stick to them. Yeah, it's something that I think about often, and I don't know if I change my mind, but I just haven't made up my mind about it. Where is it, again, quote unquote, better to live in a state of being more open to things changing and not keeping things as fixed? And I think that tends to be the side that maybe comes more naturally to me. And yet there's this other side that also wonders if, like, do you use that, and I'm speaking to myself, like, use that as an excuse not to like commit to something or dedicate yourself to something or someone.
Yeah.
But anyway, when it comes to like love in the like human sense, are you familiar with the love languages?
Yeah.
Do you know what yours is, or do you have one? Like,
what are they all again? There's like 5 of them, right? And it's like,
let's see if I can remember.
Gifts and like acts of service.
Acts of service, quality time, touch.
Quality time, yeah.
And what's the other one?
Wasn't gifts one of them?
Words of affirmation. Did we say that?
Words of affirmation, yeah, that's one.
Is there one that you prefer to receive?
Well, first I'll say that I guess in a lot of these things I'm 50% hesitant of even giving credence to the topic.
Well, we don't even have to use that framework then if it's something you're not comfortable with. I just wonder, like, you as a human, like you as a person, like, how does someone to you show that they love you?
To receiving love, I guess, like, probably like words of affirmation.
Okay.
Quality time.
Yeah, quality time is mine.
Probably those.
Okay. So that's how someone can show you that they love you.
Yeah.
Is by spending quality time with you and then saying nice things to you about you.
I think, that's probably what it would be.
Okay. Well, I guess this would just depend on each person. Is there a way is that how you would like give love then too?
No, I think it's different. Like giving, okay, well, I guess it depends on who I'm giving love to and what the context is. Mm-hmm. But if it's like a romantic love, then like touch is definitely a way I give love. Mm-hmm. And also words of affirmation. Those are probably the 2 biggest ones.
Okay.
On the giving end.
Yeah. Why is it important that we do that? Or is it? I mean, I think it is, but...
The words of affirmation?
Well, just that we show or express love, this thing called love that humans, including myself, seem to be rather preoccupied with.
I mean, like in a deep, deep why way, I don't know. But like in a lesser, like a more on the surface way, it's like, I don't know, it's increases your self-confidence, makes you feel valued, and like you matter in the grand scheme of things. Like if you died, somebody would care. Or like that you're making the world a better place, even if just through one person who appreciates your presence.
I like that.
But then, like, why that stuff? Then it gets harder to answer. Like,
yeah.
why does
But
that
maybe,
matter to you?
maybe that's enough. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, at a certain point, 5 whys down, nothing makes sense.
Did I sent you that video on absurdity? Didn't I?
Oh yeah, actually, I have not watched that. That was one of the ones where I was like text passed by, and then I forgot about the video.
Well, I can either resend it to you. Otherwise, I think it would be something you'd enjoy. But we can talk about that podcast or not sometime because I think you'd appreciate it. One of my friends sent that to me, and it's funny because he did this just today, just with something else. But when he sent the video, he's like, I watched this and I immediately thought of you. And I think it does a really good job of explaining like sort of my outlook on life and my attitude, which to a lot of people seems kind of bizarre. So to see that in a video was nice. But and you've done this before too, and I think we've done it with each other, but it's like one of the most meaningful things to me when other people find videos or art or music and then send it to you and be like, hey, this reminded me of you. And for like, again, for someone like me, that's just like, oh, I'm seen or I'm heard or I feel valued or I feel loved because somebody else like saw me in that. And like, if I hear it or see it and resonate with it, it's like, oh, again, that's another thing that I can't really describe what it is, but.
Does that fit into the love languages at all?
Being seen or heard or valued or
like
something.
Being seen. Yeah, I feel like we're like being
quality time maybe. I mean, I don't know.
Identified.
Yeah. Well, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Anyway, those are some questions I had about love.
I had a thought, but I lost it.
Well, maybe it'll come back. One of the other things I wanted to make sure I asked you this time around, I was going to do it the first thing just so we got to it and this person could listen to it. But we're a bit in now. And anyway, this was a question that my grandma wanted me to ask you.
Okay.
Or just
me specifically?
Well, you specifically, because you are who I'm talking to. But I think she's listened to some of our other podcasts and has enjoyed them.
Okay.
So she would just be curious to know, I think, your thoughts on this.
Does she listen to the whole episode?
I think so.
Make it? Okay.
Well, yeah. Otherwise, I can always just tell her what like timestamps to go to. But the question was, my grandma, she's on the older side, certainly older than me, hopefully. The question that she had was, what would attract young folks, like teens to 30s, to want to connect with old people? Like, for example, spend some time in conversation, visit an art museum, go see a movie together, etc. Like, what could like an old person do, or what would an old person have to be or do in order to like attract that from younger people?
That's a hard one.
It's an interesting question, isn't it?
I feel like with so many things, like interpersonal relationships, especially if it's not like a very close friendship, or like it's a just blossoming friendship, or it's a friendship yet to be formed. There's this worry that the other person doesn't like you very much, or doesn't really want to be spending time with you. And like, so you don't want to be the one to put yourself out there and ask them to do the thing. You'd want them to ask you, but they feel the same way. So it's just not going to happen unless one of you plucks up the courage to do it and to expose yourself and have the chance that, maybe you'll be rejected. And I feel like that problem only widens with generational gap. So it's like there's this sense, probably both ways, from young people to old people and from old people to young people, of like a judgment and also like a distaste or like a difference that's hard to overcome. I feel like if you are an average teen to 30-year-old, if you come across an old person who like isn't your grandma, or even maybe is your grandma, you might think that they disapprove of you or your ideas and thoughts or your behaviors, and then you might disapprove of their everything too. It's like, boomers versus, it's like just the word boomers like has all those implications in it that like, I do not like you, or like.
Interesting. That's the connotation that it has for you.
Well, not just like, I feel like you don't.
I know what you mean.
It's like othering someone, It's
Sure.
like, I am not a boomer, you are.
We have different values or different ways of seeing
Right.
the world.
It's not necessarily that I automatically hate you just because you're a boomer, but by classifying you as a boomer, I'm saying like we're different.
Or making assumptions that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So I feel like just that is hard to overcome. So then what would make it easier for a young person to hang out with an old person is if an old person made the effort to express interest in the young person. So then like the if a 30-year-old doesn't have to be the first mover,
Yeah. Something that just popped into mind that I think is related. Do you feel like you have any mentors in your life? Like, is there anybody that mentors you?
I feel like I've felt like that over like at times in my life, but right now, not really.
Okay. Because, like, I wonder if in part that's something that is maybe missing in our society now.
Yeah.
I mean, every person's situation is going to be different, but for those folks that maybe don't have close relationships with their parents, I wonder how many of them have like an older or adult figure in their life that cares for them or tries to guide them or just is there for them. So maybe that's partly into it. I've thought about the question too since she told me to ask you that. And one of the things that I immediately went to is just like, okay, again, practically speaking, well, what could an older person do? Because I think that's how the question was worded. And like, I guess you'd have to go to a place where young people are,
Yeah.
or either go into or create some sort of like social media presence, like where you would meet them, which is a virtual way of doing it, and then like put yourself out there. And the answer to me seems so simple, but it doesn't mean it's easy. Of just like, oh, you'd have to just ask.
Yeah.
And like you said, that would include putting yourself out there and then possibly getting rejected. But maybe that is as simple as it has to be, if not as easy, but as simple as just asking. Like, and maybe for young people, for older ones too, is just if you want something, you kind of have to ask for it.
Yeah.
Or you have to.
It would take great
go for it.
Perseverance, because I imagine you don't see many 20-year-olds hanging out with 50, 60-year-olds or whatever it is. So I would imagine that any person on the older side who's trying to go out there and ask a younger person to spend time with them, they would encounter a lot of rejection before they finally get their first yes.
Yeah. Well, not to mention, and it's not that there aren't reasons for it, but the caution that young people might have in a case like that. I mean, maybe it's the case between any time humans interact, period. But, I feel that there's a certain stereotype or a certain stigma that like if an older person is coming to a younger person and wanting to spend time with them, that, you know what I mean?
It's predatory?
Yeah.
I feel like it would depend on the age. Like if you're doing it to like a 10-year-old, then it seems more predatory than if you're doing it to a 30-year-old.
Yeah. And isn't that kind of sad? I mean, again, not that there aren't reasons for it, but it does. I feel that even in my lifetime, I've seen a difference in the way that humans interact with each other. Like I seem to remember, at least when I was younger, that like even just going to the grocery store or being in any public place, my memory is that people were much more comfortable interacting with each other, like no matter the circumstances, and that you didn't have to know them, you didn't have to be family, you didn't have to be friends, that if you were in the same vicinity, like you could interact with people and it didn't seem as weird, or people weren't as on guard as they are now. Whereas like I make a note of it every day, and to be fair, it might just be my face or something, but like I feel like when I'm going into work, when I'm at the grocery store and I am walking, like I generally will try to like make eye contact and smile with people, or at least just like head nod or whatever it is. But a lot of people like don't engage anymore. And I don't even know if the past few years with the pandemic and everything, I'm sure contributed to that even more. But even before that, I feel like I was starting to notice it, where it's kind of ironic because I'm someone that is like a self-described hermit. Like I love my alone time and being on my own and in solitude, and at the same time, like I want to apply that respect or that like benefit of doubt to other people, but and then at the same time it feels strange like being out with people and like not getting that reciprocation or not getting that interaction. And I don't know, I don't even know where I was necessarily going with that, but maybe just with older and younger people interacting, there's a few barriers maybe in the way.
Yeah, there are. That makes me think of two things. The first, probably if the onus is being put on old people to befriend young people, then a good place to start would probably would be get a job that young people work at. Like even if it's like part-time, like you're just, because then you're actually going to be around the young people and you can befriend them as coworkers and then move on to trying to go see a movie with them or whatnot. Like I remember when I worked at Domino's, I was a teenager and most of my coworkers, or like half of them anyway, were at least 10 years older than me. And there were a few there that were like 60 or like 50, like the delivery drivers. Some of them were like full grown, like adults with children. And there's even a few that had, their children were already graduated from college. So it's like you would be friends with them and like talk with them and joke around with them at work. And then probably you got to move in stages, I guess. You befriend them at work and then you have a collective group outing as a workforce. And then, now you're hanging outside of work, but it's not just with the 160-year-old in the group, it's with everybody there. And then after more time getting comfortable with them and doing those sorts of things, then you try to narrow down the group until, it's still hard to do and there's lots of barriers in the way.
This is another case of it being situationally specific, but do you have a general feeling about yourself, like how long it takes for you to bond with someone?
Long time, I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, well, okay, here's the thing. I feel like I can become friendly with people very quickly.
Okay.
Where we will think well of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And like, oh yeah, they're cool. And like people will talk to me. And I actually go out of my way quite quickly, especially like in a work context. When I'm at school, I don't really talk to anybody. But like in a work context, I usually, the first time I see someone, I ask them questions. Like, just probing their nature, I suppose. It's like icebreakers, I guess. So I've talked to them right away. It's not like I'm shy in that sense. But like to actually like become friends with the person, actually friends, I feel like it takes a long time. Like for my last job, I had friends where we were only work friends for like 2-3 years until we became outside of work friends too.
So is that the threshold, or like what marks the difference for you? It's spending time with them outside of whatever context
and then
you happen to be seeing
it's like
them?
work friends, and then spending time outside of the original context in which you met them. Then they're like probably friends.
Okay.
And then I would think of them as actually like being good friends if you spend one-on-one time with them.
Interesting. Okay. Huh.
That's how I categorize it in my mind, though.
Interesting.
Like, because if I hang out with a person outside of work, but it's always in a group of like 3 other people, we're friends, but we're not like really. We're not like. There's no way we're best friends if I'm never spending one-on-one time with you.
Interesting.
How do you see it?
I don't know. I probably should be thinking of these answers before I ask the questions. I feel like I bond with people very quickly, but I appreciate what you're saying about having the different like categories of like how you would describe them. I don't know if it's a positive or a negative thing, what I just said about sort of forming bonds quickly. That probably says more about me than it does anyone else, but because that's gotten me into trouble. But I feel like maybe it's something like trying to empathize with people, because that's why I was surprised when you said it takes a long time, because you're someone that strikes me as being very gregarious and people like being around and enjoy talking to. But I liked hearing that from your internal, I don't know, code or your own subjective perspective, that even if that's happening, even if like there's chemistry, that doesn't necessarily mean that it reaches a certain level for you. And I guess I would agree. I mean, this could be another question for you, but so like what is, maybe you said this, like what categorizes like a good friend is someone that you can spend one-on-one time with and presumably enjoy it.
Yeah.
Is frequency involved with that? Or is it more quality over quantity?
I guess frequency, for me personally, I feel like frequency isn't as involved with that. Like I feel like I consider someone a good friend if I spend one-on-one time with them once a year and we really enjoy that time. Like I would still consider that person a good friend. But I feel like other people don't. I've had at least a few cases where I let a whole year go by before wanting to spend time with another person again, and they had considered us no longer friends and didn't want to anymore because they'd like moved on with their friendship life.
Interesting.
And I was like, okay, that sucks. Thought we were friends.
Do you ever like express that?
I did. Yeah.
But it still is just,
it didn't work. Yeah, so like I guess frequency can matter, but to me I feel like you can still have a good close relationship with, I guess maybe like frequency of even communicating is important too, because like you and I we text much more often than we physically see each other. But like like a few other friends, like I don't really communicate with them unless we're hanging out in person, like Ian Nelson. Like I don't really text with Ian.
Congratulations, Ian, you're a father now, by the way.
Yes,
in case you're listening to this.
But I still think of him as a friend, and we only like see each other like once a year. But yeah, one thing else that you said that made me think of this is maybe my like thoughts on this kind of thing have changed and evolved over time to the point where I categorize it more like I did, like not really friends until we like can hang out with each other, because it's been my experience where like I've had like work friends and I feel like we're bonding and like we're opening up to each other about personal things and telling each other like we're really like close and like buddy at work, but then it seems like they don't want to hang out with me. So I'm like, you must just not like me very much then if that's the case. So like, how can I think of you as my friend if you seem like you don't want to spend time with me outside of work?
Interesting.
You know?
Well, it might come back to what you were saying earlier, which I agree with about, you know, when it comes to love and then having to decide how that's going to be distributed, because we're not able to give everything we have to every person at all times. So it might be that they really love spending time with you at work, but they have a full existence outside of it, and it's not that you don't mean something to them or that they don't enjoy their time with you, but like when they're outside of that, you know, maybe they've got their family, maybe they've got something else going on that, you know, I've tried to apply more grace in that too over the years. And something that I read recently that really, it seems so, like many things, it seems so obvious after I read it, but then like once I started like combing through my life and realizing how little I did this, I was like, wow, I'm so glad that I'm able to call myself out and try to do better going forward. But the thing that I read was rely on agreements, not on expectations. And I realized like throughout a lot of my life, particularly when it came to relationships, I would judge people on expectations that I had that we didn't have agreements for.
Like it wasn't said out loud.
Yeah,
like,
that it was, and that's not fair. Like that's you know,
that's like waking up and being mad at someone because they did something in a dream.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah, same kind of thing.
Yeah,
and I mean, I still think this is wrong, but one could argue that if you're in a friendship or you're in a relationship, there's always that thing of like, well, you'd hope that the other person would do something or act a certain way, but at the end of the day, that's not good. Like that's not fair.
It's not realistic.
And that's why I know for me, I hope an area I'm growing in is speaking things, like communicating clearly, even when it's difficult to. And that maybe like what we were saying earlier, like if you want something to happen, you have to ask for it, or at least put it out there with the other person, and not just like magically hope that
just like,
they'll read my mind, or they'll, you know, look into my eyes and know that I want them to say this thing in this moment. So anyway, that's that.
I do think though, like I was saying, I, you know, talk to people right away, like when I meet them. One thing I have learned about myself is that I think I'm an oversharer.
Welcome to the club, pal. No, I don't know.
Like there's been moments where like immediately or like a few minutes after I said a thing, I was like, they probably never would have divulged that much information to me, and I just did to them. So
well, this might just be because I'm cut from the same cloth, but I generally think that that's a trait I appreciate in people, and that actually I think other people do too. Like anything, there's a time and a place, but this ties into another question I had. I think it comes back to trust, and if you are a person, or you exhibit yourself in such a way where people feel that they can trust you, you get away with it a lot more, or your people feel more comfortable with it. Like if you give a weird vibe and then you're sharing things that you shouldn't, like that totally turns out differently. But but hearing from other people, and I provide this feedback to them, like for instance, one thing I appreciate about our relationship or our friendship is the fact that that's a part of it, is like there's the playground, or a phrase I use with people is like a meta lab, where the understanding is that once we're in that space, more or less, there's nothing that's off limits. And you don't find that with everybody. And even when like you think that you have that understanding, there still might be certain territory that you get into that all of a sudden it's like, oh, there was the buzzword, there was the red flag, and maybe I just haven't found it yet. But I do feel like I have that with you, and that's something that I appreciate.
Yeah.
So then the other question I had was like, how do you know, or how do you establish trust with someone? Like, how do you know if you trust someone or not? If you can even say.
Before I answer that, I just want to say that I'm aware that several strings back in the conversation, I said I had two thoughts on the subject.
Oh.
And I'm just saying I forgot what it was.
Oh, okay.
So I'm just, closing that off,
Acknowledging
that I didn't completely forget about it. I just forgot what it was.
Are we getting old now? Because I feel like I've said that a few times too.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just
each podcast episode goes by, I will progressively forget
more and more things
of what I intended.
All the more reason for us to talk more, to try to remember them. But then it'll be a vicious loop, but we'll just forget more. But
so how do I know if I trust someone?
Yeah,
I guess it would. There's no specific formula for this one that I've got, but it would be something like amount of times they've followed through on their word. Like,
that's a good answer.
If I don't know what the amount is, but like, if we make plans and then the plans happen, that's like one trust point.
Yeah.
And then if it happens a few more times, then it's like, okay, I didn't mean to trust them. Or, like if, I guess, observations of how they behave, if they seem like an ethical, person who's, trustworthy or like truthful, I guess, is the non-circular way of saying that. That goes up there too. And also perhaps observing how they talk about other people too.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Because they lose some trustworthy points if because this has happened, probably like everybody experiences this, where you're with a person and another person and they seem to be getting along fine together, and then as soon as one of the people goes away, they're like, they show you that, they didn't actually like that person at all. It's like,
oh, that's awful.
So it's like, I don't know, there's a insincerity there that
and authenticity.
Yeah,
that's one of my well, insincerity too. Yeah. And that's, I think, on my hierarchy of values for whatever Brian is, like, that's maybe number one, is like authenticity. And if that's not there, then
I don't know how true this is. I guess people listening will have to judge it for themselves, and maybe I'm just a liar or don't know myself. But I like to think that I don't talk bad about people behind their back, or at least that I do it less than I perceive it to be in the general populace. So like, if I hopefully I hold myself hopefully I do actually meet this standard of myself, but I like to think that if I interact amicably with a person, that I will not just go around and trash them the next.
So as soon as you get back home, you'll, God, that Brian wouldn't shut the fuck up.
I feel like a lot of the people that I have expressed disagreements and problems with, like, to other people, I've also brought that up to the person himself. Like, I've had arguments and like debates, and like heated, like we've like yelled at each other and kind of thing. Like, you're wrong about this. So I don't know. I hope that's true.
We've never had that, have we? Not that I can remember anyway.
I think maybe there's one time that it was close to that, but yeah, I don't.
Really? Do you remember what it was?
I think it was probably about our diametrically opposed diets.
Oh.
Back like 5 years ago or something.
And we got into like a heated argument?
I don't know. I think it was approaching that, but it didn't actually get
interesting. There. Well, that could be a cluster of ideas that we could explore sometime if you ever want to.
It would be interesting.
By the way, it's one of the things that I mention to people when I talk to them about you, is that one of the many things that I appreciate about our relationship is that, like, even if we've arrived at different conclusions and like starkly different conclusions about certain things, that we still have the ability to like sit down at the same table and like exchange ideas and be friends. Like, that maybe more than anything right now, and this sounds like I can hear people gagging when they hear this, but like, honestly, I think if there's anything that the world needs more of, it's that. Like, but seriously, you know what I mean? Like, people that even if you disagree on stuff can sit down and like still like love each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What I was going to say earlier is how I agreed with everything that you said about how if you can trust someone. One of the other items that I would add to that list for me is how terrible a thing I can say and they won't leave. like how awful an idea that I can bring up. And not only will they not leave, but then their reaction to it. Like
That's a good point.
if they play along then with me, or if they like try to one up me, or if they just laugh, or if they, if they don't run away screaming,
Yeah.
that's usually when I know I'm like, oh, that person I can.
Right. Yeah. I guess like
trust.
in the that same vein, because that is true. Like, how much do I feel like I can say to this person?
Yeah.
And like, will they take me charitably, or will they like just kind of one dimensionalize my thing that I'm saying to think like, oh, you're a shitty person because you just mentioned the concept of necrophilia to me, like gross. Like, it's not automatically assuming that I'm all for an idea that I just said, rather than like accepting like, oh, maybe I'm just discussing a philosophical
We're just talking about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Or that was one example that I encountered last year, where I was just like asking people questions about necrophilia, and it was interesting to me how much resistance I would get from various people. Just like right out, no reasoning, just like, stop talking to me about this.
Wow.
So like, yeah, if I feel like I can't express something to someone, then trustworthy points, I guess, go down a little bit too.
Do you trust me?
Yeah, I think so. I think I trust you quite highly. I feel like like you were saying with your playground or meta lab. Yeah, I feel like there's I don't know what ideas I could broach to you that you would reject or like not be willing to engage with. But that's definitely not true for everybody. I feel like a lot of people that I talk to, I have, and it's not good. I feel like it shouldn't be the case. But I feel like I have certain topics I'm like, I should not bring that up with this person because they're only going to get mad about it. So then I don't. Or like, I do once find that out and like, well, okay, guess I won't again.
Yeah. Well, I think I said it already, but all the more reason why I appreciate this. Because, I don't feel that with you. I don't think. That would be interesting territory to explore. Going back to the clusters of ideas. So that can be my, not assignment, because that's not how I view it, but that would be something I would look forward to, of like, ooh, like what are some areas that Wade and I haven't ever gone into before that, I don't know, we could explore.
I thought you were about to say like that would like upset me, or like,
well, that could be too. That would be an interesting exercise too, by the way, especially if we're taking seriously what it is that we just said we enjoyed about each other, that if we feel like the playground or the meta lab is there, like it would be an interesting experiment, whether it's on a podcast or not. Probably not. Maybe I don't know, whatever.
I mean, if it's really just like trying to see how egregious we can be, then probably not on the podcast.
But even just like, what are buttons that we can push or potentially push, but done in a space where we acknowledge that, like, I kind of don't like the term anymore, but that is like, you're truly in a safe space for it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you can express like things that are hard or things that are difficult or sad or like ugly, and it's okay. Like, you can do it in this context and I'll be here and I won't run away. That was a definition I had for love not too long ago with someone, was that like, if I say I love you, it means that I'm here and I'm not going anywhere. Like, depending on what we're talking about. But
that actually brings up a quick, interesting little thing, because I feel like the word safe space seemingly has two different uses that are like opposed.
Yes.
One of like safety from reproach of ideas, like you can say whatever you want and it'll be fine because this is a safe space.
Which that's the kind I mean, and then
there's the other safe space, which is safety from ideas.
Yeah, nothing bad will happen here. Like, that's
like we
like
won't challenge you.
Yeah.
Or like bring up things that you find uncomfortable.
Yeah. I prefer the first.
Yeah, I guess that's not something I really thought about, of how like
that's changed.
Safe space is two things.
And in particular with universities, like I feel like safe spaces used to be what we were, what the first definition would be. Like, here's a place where we can
discuss ideas,
bring out any of these ideas, and you'll be free to do so, and we'll do it respectfully, but in a way that can challenge us. Whereas to me, in many cases, it seems like it's gone the opposite, where it's like, oh, we can't hear anything that would upset us or that we might disagree with.
Yeah, that does seem to be the portrayal of it, but I haven't experienced these university safe spaces firsthand to be able
that's
to
good.
judge if it is the first one or the second one.
Well, and you're in a university, or what is it called? It's a university.
It's a university.
Yeah. Anyway, well, okay. So I think we got to two topics on my list. How are we for time? Is there
Probably should end soon. It's been like over 2 hours. Although I do want to say, I did know somebody who would do that, what you're just mentioning, of they would purposefully try to push buttons just so they could learn about people, like see where their lines are. Except the thing that was annoying about them was at first they just seemed like an asshole.
Right.
And then he seemed like an asshole. And then after a while, I was like, I asked him like, why
are you like this?
And then he explained it to me like, oh, I do this because it like helps me learn about people. Like I like go for the hardest thing and then draw back.
And I appreciate that. I think if I was to do that, and sometimes I do, it's with the understanding with the person that that's what we're doing. It wouldn't just be that I come across that way. And to be fair, I understand how giving someone that heads up maybe takes away some of the
power of doing it.
But that would be, I think, maybe at least for me right now, would be the context that I would, because I like doing that sometimes. I mean, who doesn't like to find out where people's boundaries are?
Yeah.
But
for him, it just seemed like he was trying to trying to piss people off.
Yeah.
But apparently it was because he was trying to better understand them and like learn.
Which is a compliment to them, but that's what's sad about that situation is that they wouldn't have seen it that way. Yeah. Because I don't know. It's complimentary to want to know someone, I think. Like for someone to spend time and attention trying to get to know another person. It's, I don't know. Isn't that a quote by Henry David Thoreau, I think? Like the highest compliment ever paid me was someone who asked my opinion and heeded to my answer or something. Something like that.
I was just thinking about Henry David Thoreau the other day. And while I liked Walden, it was a good book. It's also like he's often just like given way too much credit, or like is thought of as much more than he was. He was just living in a cabin a walk away from his house. And he just was like, it's not like he was living some rugged mountain lifestyle, giving up all his earthly possessions to try and rough it in the farm. And if he couldn't, then he's going to die. Like it was like, it's nice. Like he was living in a more nature area with a appreciation for nature. But I feel like his accomplishments don't go really beyond the fact that he wrote a book that was good to read.
Well, like many legends, or I don't even know, he's not maybe considered a legend, but there's a lot more ascribed to him than maybe what he was. But it doesn't maybe take away the importance of like whether or not he actually lives up to all of what people apply to him. What people are applying to him that's through him is still maybe important.
Yeah, that's valid.
Anyway.
Well, did you want to have one more idea on your list that we could talk about for a few minutes before we end? Let's
see. I have two questions that I think kind of go hand in hand for me.
Okay.
What are you most afraid of?
One question at a time?
Yeah.
Okay. What am I most afraid of? The first thing that came to mind probably isn't what I'm most afraid of, but it was spiders.
I should have known that was the answer.
I feel like being most afraid of a physical object or creature is a little bit silly. Like I feel like the thing that you would be most afraid of is like a concept or like a feeling rather than literally a spider or, all the spiders. Although I will say that I do have spider nightmares even still as an adult. And I had them as a child and I still have them.
You wrote a good story about spiders.
I did, yeah. And you made a good point a long while back that fear is like one face of the coin of like fascination or something like that.
Oh,
like,
did I say that?
Maybe not in those words.
I mean, I'd be happy to take credit for that, but
you were basically saying that like you owe whatever you're afraid of, you are like equally like fascinated by.
Oh yeah.
So like my writing an entire short story about spiders, despite the fact that I really do not like spiders, would be evidence of that.
Yeah.
If that is true. That like you're drawn to it, but also repulsed by it at the same time.
There's something, I don't want to interrupt or anything, but there's some quote that, doesn't it say something like, the only reason that we fear things is because we don't understand them. Like if we understood them, then we would cease to be afraid. So that's where I wonder if that instinct is coming from. It's like you're fascinated by it and it scares you, but the fascination maybe is the door through which, if you could understand it, that maybe the fear would go away.
Anyway. I don't know. Maybe that makes sense in some metaphorical sense, but like I understand spiders.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe then it's not like the spider itself, it's whatever is scaring you about the spider that you have to come to
Okay.
terms
The
with.
underlying.
So like
Yeah.
if it's a creepy crawly thing, or if it's because it has the potential to kill you, maybe it's like the fear of, the
It's
fact that it
definitely
can hurt
not
you.
that it has the potential to kill me, because there's plenty of other adjacent things
Sure.
like
So right.
snakes
So
that I'm not afraid of.
this is where that, well, we don't have to talk about it now, but like, yeah, what is it about spiders that
Yeah. I will say two more relevant things about spiders, both having to do with LSD trips. Yeah, I think it was on the first time I ever took LSD. I felt no fear of spiders. And I was okay, so I felt like I had spider webs across my eyes, and it did not freak me out. I was fascinated by it in that context, circumstance. And I was going outside, pushing through the bushes, trying to meet spiders. Like I was seeking spiders out, and I didn't find any. But it was interesting how like I completely lost my fear, and it was actually only the fascination was there.
mm,
A different time on LSD, the fear was very much there, enhanced, and I was seeing spiders and everything. Like there was art on the wall that started to look more and more like a spider. And then I went into the bathroom and I looked at myself in the mirror and I started to like become a spider.
Oh.
And then I had this idea that perhaps I really am a spider secretly. Like
maybe you are.
my entire life as a human is a delusion or a dream, all built for the purpose of rejecting the truth that I am a spider, and my deepest fear is myself.
Maybe there's your answer.
But I don't think I'm a spider.
Or there's something in the spider-ness that you are.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
And it's a rejection of
Whatever that is.
yeah. That's very, Freudian or Jungian, but that's an idea.
Okay. Was there something else?
Well, then I was just thinking like, what actually is my deepest fear, if not spiders? And I don't know, like, I think that's a hard one to know about yourself, what it really is, because like, there's like isolation, which I don't know how afraid I am of that. Obviously, I like human contact, but I also like a fair amount of alone time. But like being truly isolated, that could potentially be up there. But then also like thinking about like non-existence or like death. Not well, I guess sometimes the act of actually dying, but like the no longer being around, or like the unknown, I guess is a big fear that is, right behind the fear of death is the fear of fear of the dark. Don't really have that. Okay, honestly, when I was a child, I remember having a lot of fearful experiences, just in general, really. Like there were times like my family would put on a lot of horror movies, like because like my mom and my brother were really into horror movies, and I hated them, and I would try to like I would try to avoid them, but there was still the sounds, and like I just like I was so stricken by terror from all these horror movies that we would watch, like The Exorcist especially. And then at night, not only on horror movie nights, but just when I was a kid, at night I would like see things that like would freak me out that were probably just conjurings of my imagination. Like there was this one time that I saw like a ghostly woman figure right outside my glass door to the outside to the backyard, and that just freaked me out. And there were like, I had night terrors as a child. So like there were just a lot of things that I was afraid of. So I thought to myself, I don't think I'll ever be capable of living alone. Like I don't know how I would live alone, because when I'm alone at my house at night, I get freaked out by everything.
Whoa.
When I was like 10 or 8 or whatever it was. But now, like if I'm alone somewhere and it's dark, I don't have problems. So I guess that's gone away. So I wouldn't say I'm afraid of the dark. So I don't know. How about spiders, maybe?
Spiders.
What's your fear?
The thing that usually comes to mind for me is that I'm someone that tells myself that there are certain ideals or certain values that I hold very dear or very close to me. And I guess what I'd be afraid of is that if like push came to shove, or if I was put in a situation where those were tested, that I would fold, or that it would turn out that I didn't. I hope that I would stand behind them, or
yeah, that's a good one.
Like that there's all sorts of things that I tell myself, I'm this or I'm that. And like, what if it was the case that I was put in that situation and then I just Like, I mean, that would be something that I guess.
Is it more a fear of like not knowing yourself, or is it a fear of like hypocrisy, or is it
Maybe hypocrisy, or it's that thing maybe I said earlier of like the inauthenticity
yeah.
of I want to be true to who I am or to whatever.
Yeah.
And if the things that I feel are the most fundamental part of me turned out like that I couldn't even live up to them or stand up to them, I think that would be pretty disappointing.
No, I feel that too. I don't know like how to rank these.
Yeah.
Like
Oh,
that would be
right.
my
Yeah.
top, but
Yeah.
yeah.
What I was going to mention with the fear, we might have talked about it before, or even again on a podcast, but it's worth mentioning again. Did we ever discuss the distinction between terror and horror? Have we ever talked about that?
No, but I think Stephen Hawking has a distinction. Or not
That-
Stephen
that's-
Hawking, Stephen King.
The distinction between.
Yeah.
No, he's where I got it from.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I like his, and it's just that my understanding, and I might not be defining it exactly in the same words as he does, but that terror is the anticipation of fear, and horror is the realization of fear. So I like that, where it's like terror is like, oh my God, what's behind the door? What's behind the door? It could be anything. And then horror is when you actually open the door and see that it's a bunch of severed heads or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I use that in writing sometimes, like which emotion or which energy am I channeling more? Is it the anticipation of fear, or is it the realization of fear?
Dread.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the terror.
So then the accompanying question is, what brings you the most joy?
One thing that comes to mind is like learning,
Mm.
forming those new connections or those eureka moments, or feeling wonder of whether it's like reading a book and learning a cool new thing that I didn't know before that expands my view of the world and my understanding. But then another thing is like creating things, even if they will never come to full fruition. Like for the past like 7 years now, I've been working on like a board game that keeps on changing and evolving and probably will never be finished.
The Cones of Dunshire.
Basically. But the process of making it and thinking of new ideas for it is fun.
Isn't that
and
great?
enjoyable. So it's like, I think that maybe those things share a common theme of like thought, or like the creation of thought is enjoyable.
My grandma and I were talking about that the other day, of just how rewarding the process of creation is, and that sometimes the final result, it can be great, it can be whatever. I mean, it can feel nice to have a completed product, or if that's even what you want to call it at the end. But really the magic for us anyway was more in the bringing it into being.
Yes.
So
for me, it's the initial conceptualization and early fleshings out of the thing, rather than the laborious endeavor of working out all of the details. Like for instance, when we used to live together, I would write short stories, like the spider one we talked about a little bit. The moments that I had of thinking of the plot and characters and world of the story, those were always very satisfying and like moments of happiness. But then the actual writing down of the story was more like a chore, because it's like, it's kind of like my mind had already come up with the story, and now my hands just needed to get it into paper, and like also in like good language that was nice to read, where it's like I was basically, I had already satisfied myself just by thinking of it. And now it's like, oh, I gotta actually do it.
Yeah, and that takes discipline.
Yeah, and it's not nearly as happy as just the thought is.
I wonder, to the extent that it's even useful to think about it in these terms, but like say for instance the Myers-Briggs personality type indicator, I think when you've taken it you've gotten different results though. But like say for instance, I think when you first took it you were like ENFP and I was INFP, and those are often considered sister types, which would explain perhaps why we have a lot of similar traits, but there are still differences. Anyway, where I was going with that, whatever model we use, is I wonder if because we have that in common, I think. Like the part where I get the most enjoyment of is the idea generation.
Yeah.
And then the part where I've struggled, or historically struggled, but I think I've gotten better at it as I've gotten older, is the disciplining of actually then doing the work.
Yeah.
So I wondered like, because there are other people that have, I think, sometimes the opposite problem. They're really good like at grunt working. They're good at doing like the details and focusing on the nitty gritty. But when it comes to ideas, it's like they're lost. Like they don't really have a great idea, but if they're given a great idea, oh, okay. And then they'll,
Right.
you know, so anyway, interesting. So learning, wonder, eureka moments, idea generation.
Yeah. I think it's maybe changed or gotten better for me recently because now I haven't been writing short stories, although I still do come up with ideas for them and I write the ideas down, but I don't write the actual short stories, at least for the past several years. But what I do is make videos. So I do find that the creation of the script and writing the script is the enjoyable part. So that's actually a writing process. And then it's the recording the audio, editing the audio, and adding in video to it that is the part that I don't enjoy.
So it's just shifted, but it's grown.
It's grown, but it's still the beginning of the process.
Interesting.
And maybe there's a difference there because writing a script is different from writing a short story. Whereas like the script, you can basically just write it, like your thoughts onto the page. Whereas a short story, your thoughts can't just go on the page. They have to go into like prose. I don't know. Maybe it's like expressing ideas of a plot. They can't just, the plot summary is not the short story, you know, but it's much more, it's not quite 1-to-1, but it's much more 1-to-1 for, you know, script ideas into script. So maybe it's still just a straightforward idea generation, except I'm writing it out. But that's easier to do than it is to write a short story.
Interesting. Yeah, that's funny because I see what you mean. And I know that something I actually enjoy about writing prose, or in my case, like maybe fiction, is that when I'm writing from a certain person's point of view, it's actually okay that I don't have all the answers because they won't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it is, I mean, whereas I think if I was writing like a video script for something, it definitely is focusing more on, well, maybe it doesn't have to be, but like more on the ideas, like having a concise meaning and a concise message. Whereas like if I'm writing from a certain person's point of view, it's okay if they don't have like, you know, everything figured out because it's just, I don't know. But then what I'm writing is different too. It's just scenes of stuff, all the themes of life and behavior in there. But anyway, okay, so that's what brings you the most joy.
Yeah. Also along those lines, the creative process, one thing I've always always struggled with is winnowing down the ideas into the final one idea, because I guess you can write multiple variations of the same short story, but that's just more laborious, or like that's not useful because like who's going to read all of the different ways the story can go and within the one general plot line. So it's like I think of all these different ways it could happen, and then I have to like decide which one is it. Whereas like with the script, that's not really there as much. I can just write all the ideas I have, and that's what the script is going to be. And that also applies to like making a board game or like card games and stuff. It's like there's all these different ways the game could be, all these different mechanics it could have, and I like all of them. I don't know which ones to choose, so I just like write them all down, and I'm like, I'll decide later.
That is the P in the ENFP or INFP, by the way. That openness, that like always keeping options available rather than like J making the decision and choosing.
That's been a lifelong problem, really. Not just with creativity, but just in general.
Me too. Oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, those are good problems, I think.
Yeah. Well, we've been going on for quite some time. I'm sure we could with more because we got through what, 3 of your 40 questions? 40 ideas.
Always the next time, unless we die.
Yeah.
But
do you have any parting words or thoughts? Perhaps a recommendation of an activity, such as book read, movie watched, that I or the person who's listening could do?
Well, I mentioned The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. That was a worthwhile read, which, by the way, I'll mention throughout this conversation. I was mentioning there was like a friend that I've been doing some of this stuff with. You met him, Reese, who lives in Utah.
Yeah.
Just parting words just to recognize him, and, you know, that being grateful for friendships such as his and such as yours. I'm grateful that we have this opportunity to talk and exchange ideas. And like we acknowledged earlier, that having that environment of the playground or the meta lab isn't something that you find every day. So when it's found, it is appreciated. I'm trying to think if I've seen any good movies lately. This could start a whole other conversation, so we don't have to talk about it. But Adrienne told me that at least she watched, I'm assuming you watched it with her, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that
Very immediately became one of my
Yeah.
favorite movies.
that can be a topic for next time. But
Have you watched it?
yeah,
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, yeah. So then that is the movie that you should watch.
okay. So
Audience.
There's
person.
a book, there's a movie, but yeah,
Nice.
it's supposed to be snowing quite a bit this evening. Not that that maybe makes a difference in anyone's life listening to this now, but
Well, it'll make a difference in my life. I have to drive through it.
yeah. So if you die on the way home, this will be the last. Well, but then nobody will ever probably hear this
Well, if the SD card is not broken, then
or burned.
yeah, then somebody could still hear it, despite my being a corpse.
I can find it, and then does Adrian have the password to your YouTube account?
Well, yeah, but it's like I just don't log out really. It's
Okay.
just you open it up on my computer and I'm logged in.
So we'll get it uploaded somehow. If these were your last words, is there anything you'd part the universe with?
Nah.
All right. Nah.